Good evening to everyone. Welcome everyone here in the room. Welcome everyone on the screen. I hope you can hear me and see me across the screen. I'm very happy to have you all here with us, and I'm particularly happy to have with us today Dr. Bal Gopal Shrestha, who has been with us these whole 2 weeks, as has Sri Lakshmi Shrestha. As you will know, they have both been here in Toronto, leading the Newars summer school, and this is the last day of our school. It feels like a short time somehow, but the time just flew past, and we did so many things. We had so many wonderful guests, students, instructors with us, and it feels like been a very rich time. And I'm very happy and privileged to have been able to done this together with you. I already received a lot of wonderful feedback and thanks and appreciation of the work the two of you have done, and the work we've done together. So let me take this moment to thank you for having been with us, for the extraordinary work you've done, and for the many things we have learned thanks to your presence. I would also like to thank at this point our sponsors. The Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Center for Buddhist Studies has been the sponsor of the summer school, and we're very grateful for what they have made possible. Were joined by the Center for South Asian Studies at the Asian Institute, Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. We also thank them for their support, and we thank Sam here at the center, at the Ho Center, for his support in person, as well as the Department for the Study of Religion, which has been hosting us, giving us this room, and helping us with all the technology we've been using. Before I introduce our respected guests, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates for thousands of years. It has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Bal Gopal Shrestha, our speaker today, is a researcher affiliated with the University of Oxford, UK. He obtained his PhD in anthropology from Leiden University, the Netherlands. He has taught government and politics of South and Southeast Asia at Leiden University. He has been lecturer at CNAS at Chigoan University, research fellow at the IIAS in Leiden, and at the Chentring Punjuma near Skåne, Switzerland. He has conducted fieldwork in Belgium, India, the Netherlands, Nepal, and the UK, and has published widely on Nepalese religious rituals, Hinduism, Buddhism, ethnic nationalism, the Maoist movement, political developments in Nepal, and on the Nepalese diaspora. He is the author of the monographs, and I'll hold up one because this is the book to go to if you want to work on Sangku and Vajrayogini. The Sacred Town of Sangku, the Anthropology of Nepal Rituals, Religion and Society in Nepal. An urgent read for anyone who hasn't taken up this yet. And another wonderful book, The Newars of Sikkim, Reinventing Language, Culture and Identity in the Diaspora. Another path-breaking book in this specific field. He is also compiler of, I don't see it here now, we've been using it a bit over the last 2 weeks. A compiler, a collaborative project, a dictionary of classical Newari compiled from manuscript sources, the big go-to resource for anyone who studies Newar. He has also written and translated a dozen of literary and research books that include culture, history, critics, essays, poetry, and short stories, and folk stories. And I should also add that Bal Gopal Shrestha is a poet, and has also within our as part of our summer school shared some of that knowledge with our students, and showed us how to read, how to appreciate, how to understand modern Newar poetry. I am therefore even more curious, also from this background, to hear about the struggle for survival, the history of Nepalbhasa literature, and I will stop here and hand over to my respected colleague, guest, and friend.
So, thank you, Mr. Emmerich, inviting us here in this prestigious university for this summer school and to give this talk. I'm really very happy, and thank you for the generous introduction to me, also inviting us. And I thank you to University of Oxford, Department of Study of Religion, Robert Young Ho Family Foundation, Center for Buddhist Studies. I'm really pleased to be here. So now I shall start my talk. I have some text written. It is probably some of you may have read somewhere from my articles, but I have tried to do update and I will start reading them. And some slide also I have prepared. Probably there will also be some interest for you. So as you already heard, the title of my talk today is Struggle for Survival, the History of Nepalbhasa Literature. And Nepalbhasa, Newar or Newari, or Newa is the language of the Newars, the original inhabitants of Nepal Valley, the proper Nepal. But Nepalbhasa is a rich and highly developed language with vast literature both in ancient and modern times. There are 500 Tibeto-Burman languages in the world, but only 5 of them have ancient literature. Among them is Nepalbhasa, which possesses ancient literature. In Nepal, only Nepalbhasa has the longest attested history of written tradition after the native. The tradition of writing in Nepalbhasa began in early Mulla period, 1200 to 1480 AD. Evidence tells the Nepalbhasa became the language of literature in the second half of the 14th century. Nepalese scholars believe that when Muslims invaded the valley of Nepal in 1349, they burned down large collection of manuscripts written in Nepalbhasa together with the Hindu Buddhist temples of the valley. So far, the oldest book found written in Nepalbhasa is Har Mekhla, that is Tantric Medicine Instrumental Manual, dated 1374 AD. Originally, the book was in the Prakrit language, but was later translated into Sanskrit and then in Nepalbhasa. The second oldest book found in Nepalbhasa is Narad Smriti, dated 1380 AD. It is also called Nyaya Vikasini, Manav Nyaya Shastra, Narad Smriti, etc. Several versions of Amarkosh, Sanskrit Newar dictionary are also to be found dated between 1381 and 1386. The oldest known chronicle of Nepal, the Gopal Vanshabali, was compiled. I have Gopal Vanshabali somewhere in the later compiled. This one. Yeah. This one. Gopal Vanshabali. Actually, this text was written in Fujimura letters, mixed Sanskrit and Nepalbhasa. Dhanabhaja Bajacharya, who actually translated it, and later together with Dr. Kamal Prakash Malla, Hasimal edition, together with English and English translation has been published in 80s. Yeah. Now we can go back to other slides. Newar writer and historian Chhatra Bahadur Kayastha claims that the earliest dated poem in Nepalbhasa was dated 925 AD, and a poem written by King Harsadev, 1090 and 1997, was the second earliest poem in Nepalbhasa. But there is problem. We don't have really hard evidence for that, this proof. There is no controversy about the 3 earliest poems in Nepal, classical Nepalbhasa, dated AD 1564, 1575, 1572, found in Patan, written by an unknown poet. Scholars agree upon the fact that the earliest narrative goes back to 1374 AD. The earliest extended drama to AD 1673. Only during the 200 years of Malla period, the court recognized Nepalbhasa for administrative purposes. However, after the Gorkha conquest of Nepal in 1769, Nepalbhasa had to go destitute. At the beginning of the Shah regime, it could retain its prestige and importance. Shah kings such as Rana Shah, Rajendra Vikram Shah still function as patron of Nepalbhasa and themselves wrote literature in this language. But gradually, the Gorkhali or the Khas language, the mother tongue of the new rulers, had to prevail in Nepal, displacing the Nepalbhasa. The story of Nepalbhasa now I start a little bit of interpretation, probably not necessary to tell all interpretation, but still a few lines I will read out. The word Newar itself is a recent one, which began to popularize only after the Gorkha conquest of Nepal Valley in 1769. Ralph Turner asserts that the word Newar, Newal, and Nepal all have developed from the word Nepal or Newar. There are conflicting views about the origin of the word, however. Conflicting views are held on the origin of term Nepal. In his elaborated discussion of the word Nepal, Kamar Prakash Malla stated the earliest instance of this word appeared in Allahabad pillar dated inscription Samundragupta 335-375 AD. He confirmed inside Nepal the first evidence to prove the term Nepal referred to the people of Nepal is the inscription of Tistung dating from 512 AD, commissioned by Basantadev. Quoting Suniti Kumar Chatterjee, he hints at its origin in Tibeto-Burman speaking tribe, but largely dismisses the Sanskritization of the word. Recently, presenting an extensive discussion of the word Nipojana and Nepal, Diwakar Acharya stresses the word Nepal must be originated by adding a suffix ala to Nipa, Nipa, or says from Rig Vedic period. He believes no, this oh. Origin. He, however, rejects the idea of linking the word Nepal to the sage name Nimuni, as many earlier historians did in their attempts to Sanskritize the word. Furthermore, Acharya states the Newar identity was taking shape from the lay people, Naipal, as the whole and special identity of the ruling Nipa began to be arbitrary. By analyzing the place and river names written in Lichavi inscription, K.P. Malla concluded that although the Lichavi rulers were inclined to use Sanskrit, the language spoken by the people belonging to the Tibeto-Burman stock, he thinks is likely that the names of places found in the inscription are an archaic form of Nepalbhasa. Michael Witzel also saw the possibility of them being an early form of Newar, however, he preferred to call them Kirati. David Gellner states the Newari seems to have been spoken by the inhabitants of Kathmandu Valley as far back as the record goes. We also read that well-known anthropologist and the social scientist Dor Bahadur Bista mentions that Newar people had been settled in the valley since prehistoric time. Similarly, renowned Nepalese historian Jagdish Chandra Regni writes, in fact, Newar society carries 5,000 years long social history of Nepal. Although there exist various cultural and civilization inside Nepal, only in Kathmandu Valley we see the unbroken cultural continuation from prehistoric time to till date. After the Lichavis, the Thakuri ruled Nepal from the 9th to 12th centuries. Not much historical evidence has been found from this period. And the earliest dated inscription Evidence on the stone in Nepalbhasa was found in Vajrayani sanctuary in Saku is dated 1172 later. During the Malla period, the Nepalbhasa produced both in inscription and a manuscript. Numerous inscription as well as a vast literature in mixed Newars Sanskrit and a pure Newar language date from this time. Vast collection of classical Nepal-Bhasa literature are preserved in Nepal in the National Archive, the Kesar Library, and the Asa archives, whereas Western scholars carried away thousands of manuscripts from Nepal and deposited them in different libraries of the world. During the Malla period, the language that was spoken by the commoners began to be known as Nepal-Bhasa, or the language of Nepal, or Desa-Bhasa, language of the country. It was not the court language because still Sanskrit, the Deva-Bhasa, the language of the god, was the preferred language for the kings, priests, and the courtiers. The first use of the word Newar was found in an inscription dated AD 1654 of King Pratap Malla at Hanumanrogam. The Newar people to this day call their language Nepal-Bhasa. In Western philology, it is now more commonly known by the name Newari, as Lina wrote this. Newar scholars from Dharmaditya Dharmacharya to Darsas Newa and many others, Darsasaki, many others strongly disapprove to be called Newari to the Nepal-Bhasa. So this is Vajrayani. Okay. No, this one I've been Vajrayani inscription, the earliest inscription. And this one, Ukuba text, Tarpatra. Yeah. Renasa, and now I, as you already know, yesterday, Christopher already gave you background of the history, so I think I didn't repeat too much. But now I jump to Renasa in Nepal Bhasa literature. That is, that would be from 1846 to 1950, or 49. The Newars were to be excluded from political or decision-making posts, as well as from military service from the beginning of the Gorkha conquest in 1769. Before 1880, people in general had the opportunity to educate their children in Nepal. In the 1890s, when the first school of Nepal, Darbar School, Palace School, was made accessible to the public, the Newars were among the first to make use of the education. The valley of Kathmandu was close to people from other parts of Nepal. The Rana saw the Newars as inhabitants of the politically centralized state and as possible antagonists who might strangle them at any time. Intellectual, social reformers, political activists, or religious reformers, such as Theravada Buddhist or Arya Samaj supporters, were all regarded as a threat to their autocratic rule. An Indian scholar, Acharya Narendra Dev, mentioned Prime Minister Jangabadur's seizing of old texts from monasteries. He further writes, a British residential doctor in Kathmandu, Daniel Wright, collected and presented those books to Cambridge University, which were seized from the monasteries and thrown out on the street by Jangabadur. Janaklal Baide has written that the prohibition of Nepal Bhasa from the court was already declared in 1854 AD, but K.P. Malla remarks that the documents mentioned by Baide unfortunately cannot be traced. Malla confirms Chittadhar Hirday's statement about the 1905 ban. It is more likely that Jangabadur may have orally ordered such measures and no written documents were kept. Especially with the rise of Rana Prime Minister Chandra Shamsher, Nepal Bhasa was banned from the court. The suppression of Nepal Bhasa and the Newar intellectual intensified during his reign. That was 1901 to 1925 with the rule. The language of the Newars, Nepal Bhasa, began to become Newari, while the word Nepali began to be designated the Parvatiya or Khastpura or Gorkhari language. The name Nepali for the Khast language was first made popular outside Nepal. Only in the 1930s, the rulers of country recognized it. Some first language activists residing abroad in Darjeeling, such as Surya Bikram Gewali, Dharnidhar Sharma, and Hari Prasad Pradhan, were long been insisting to rename first language as Nepali. Similarly, the word Newari was designated as Newari by Western scholars long before it was adopted by anybody in Nepal. In the latter period of the Rana regime, Newar intellectuals had to suffer profoundly under the hands of Rana. The Rana Prime Minister, Juddha Shamsher, turned much hostile toward Nepalbhasa. Anyone daring to use Newar either for business or literary purposes was found guilty of committing an illegal, even a reversionary act. Actually, I quoted Linhart here. A considerable amount of writers were given admonition and fines, sent to prison or forced into exile. Rana regime was afraid of the Nepalbhasa and wanted to suppress it to stop any propaganda which might be communicated through that language against their autocratic rule. Interestingly, at the same time, the Nepalbhasa literary renaissance, 1847-1940 began, which became a milestone in the history of Nepalbhasa literature. Pandit Nishtananda Bajracharya, C.D. Das Amathe, I have your picture of this somewhere. C.D. Das Amathe, Jagat Sundar Malla, Yogbis Kansakar are the four most eminent literary figures of Nepalbhasa Renaissance period. In 1909, Nishtananda, the eldest among them, was the first to publish a Nepalbhasa book entitled Ekabim Sati Pragya Paramita, a Buddhist text with Sanskrit slokas. In 1914, he printed another book, Lalita Vistara, which deals with Buddha's life, many other Buddhist religious stories, and the Swambhu Purana, a mythical story about the creation of Nepal Valley. Though these works were based on religious stories, he lent his originality to them. He brought printing equipments from Calcutta and carried out all printing work himself, including the laborious job of composition. Later, it became difficult for him to print his books because the government imposed censorship on all publications. Virtually all Nepalbhasa publications were banned. So Nishtananda had to print and distribute his books secretly. His major contribution was to publish materials for the first time in spoken language of the Newar society using the Devanagari script. Newar scholars had used old script and the old language in writing and copying thousands of manuscripts without making change in their spoken language into account. The tradition of copying manuscript by hand in Nepal script, Ujimola, Prachalit, Ranjana scripts continued until the beginning of last century. The most prolific writer of Nepalbhasa literature during the Renaissance period was C.D. Das Amathe. He wrote nearly 50 books, including a version of the epic Ramayana. His early writings deals mainly with religious and moral philosophy, and later he wrote many poems which reflects the ideas on social reform. He advocated equal rights for women, including access to education. He wrote against caste discrimination, which was then supported by the law. These were revolutionary writings for his time. He used to visit the gatherings of Arya Samaj, a Hindu reform movement based on Vedanta philosophy, which members were active in social reform program. In Nepal, Madhavraj Joshi established it in 1920, while in India, Swami Dayananda Saraswati established it in 1875. C.D. Das encouraged young people to write in Nepalbhasa. An active young man of Arya Samaj, Jyan Bahadur Newar writes that he would never have become a writer in Nepalbhasa if C.D. Das had not inspired him in those meetings. Many young students who were inspired by C.D. Das later became very famous writers in Nepal. The Rana government hanged Sukrara Sastri, one of the avowed adherent of Arya Samaj in 1941. He was the author of the first Newar grammar, Nepalbhasa Vyakaran, and later also wrote textbooks in Nepalbhasa for children, Nepalbhasa Varnamala, Nepalbhasa Readers 1 and 2, Sukraraj was executed together with three other political activists, Gangala Shrestha, Dharmabhakta Mathema, and Darshan Shah. They were all members of People's Council, Praja Parishad, which was an anti-Rana political organization. However, Sukraraj himself had no connection with the Praja Parishad and was punished because of his association with the Arya Samaj and his social reform activities. People also considered he received capital punishment because of his love for his mother tongue, Nepalbhasa. Sukraraj declared he would submit his life for Nepalbhasa, his mother tongue, which he considered equal to his mother. Interestingly enough, the four martyrs, except Darshan Chand, were all the Newars. In 1912, Jagat Sundar Malla, who advocated education in mother tongue, began a school in Nepalbhasa in Bhaktapur. He wrote English Nepalbhasa and Nepalbhasa English dictionaries, as well as textbooks, both in Nepalbhasa and in Khas Nepali. He was arrested, tortured, and threatened with imprisonment if he did not stop his actions. He was the first to advocate education in the mother tongue in Nepal. He had to pretend to be a madman to continue his work. Similarly, Yagbir Singh Kansakar, the youngest among the four literary figures, suffered at the hands of Rana. He was arrested on several occasions, fined, and tortured. His cloth shop became a gathering place for Nepalbhasa as well as first Nepali writers of those days. First Nepali poets such as Leknath Paudel, Samu Prasad Dhunial, Chakra Pani Chaliset, Lakshmi Prasad Devkota used to gather in his shop. All of them later became outstanding literary figures in Khas Nepali literature. When the government found it out, their writings were seized and they were severely warned not to hold such meetings. In 1924, when Yagbir Singh published one of his religious poems, he and his publisher both were fined. In 1929, Yagbir and his friends sought permission to open a public library. All those who signed this petition were fined heavily. Now we turn a little bit to jail period of Nepalbhasa, the jail and exile period also. Yeah. In January 1941, Juddha Shamsher arrested many people together with members of Praja Parishad. They were social activists, teachers, and writers. Among them were many Nepalbhasa writers, including the great poet Chittadhar Hirday and Siddhicharan Shrestha, were sent to jail for years. This proved to be a gift to Nepalbhasa literature because some of the political prisoners turned into writers in jail. Though they had to write secretly, they wrote many books in prison, which made a significant contribution to Nepalbhasa literature. Siddhicharan Shrestha, Dharmadatta Yemi, Kedarman Betit, and Hari Krishna Khobilu were some of the new genres born in the jail period of Nepalbhasa literature. The jail period contribution is considered to be a dawn to the modern literature in Nepalbhasa. The Rana regime was supported by British colonial power, but with increasing protests against the occupation of India, the British themselves were losing ground. The increasing nationalist movement in India terrified the Rana, as it was encouraging the educated youngster of Nepal to rebel against their rule. The suppression of Nepalbhasa writers, the majority population in the center of power, was one expression of this fear. Therefore, the Rana Prime Minister Juddha Shamsher went further in the effort to suppress the Nepalbhasa. In 1933, he called a meeting of all non-Newar writers and pressed them to stop writing. The brave history of Khas Nepali literature began in India with the publication of weekly Gorkhali from Banaras by Surya Bikram Gewali and a Chandrika from Kharsang by Parasmani Pradhan, which postulated the nationalistic image of modern Nepal. Similarly, the Newar people living in India for study or business purposes were also active in the service of their mother tongue. They started establishing organizations and publication in India. In 1926, Dharmaditya Dharmacharya, I thought I am already, yeah, this is the picture of Dharmaditya Dharmacharya, founded the Nepalbhasa literary organization, Nepalbhasa Sahitya Mandal in Calcutta, who had earlier started publishing the Nepalbhasa journal Buddha Dharma Nepalbhasa. He had to suffer tremendously from the Rana government for his dedication to his mother tongue. The Buddhist monk who had expelled from Nepal in 1944 for advocating Theravada established Dharmadaya Sabha, a Buddhist religious council in Sarnath, and started publishing books in Nepalbhasa. Later, Dharmadaya Sabha started publishing a second Nepalbhasa journal, Dharmadaya. Chosapasa, another Nepalbhasa literary association, was established in Calcutta in May 1950. It came to Nepal after the political change in 1951 February. In 1945, together with some political prisoners, Chittadhar Hirde and other Nepalbhasa writers were released from prison by Rana government. In the same year, Padma Samser became the prime minister, who was more liberal than his predecessor. In 1946, he allowed those Buddhist monks who were expelled to return to Nepal. He also lifted the ban of Nepalbhasa publication and opened a separate department of censorship for publication in Nepalbhasa. Within 3 or 4 years, 115 Nepalbhasa books were cleared from the censorship, as recorded by the then censor officer Khadagman Malla of Nepalbhasa department. But the liberalization process of Rana regime started too late. In 1947, when India achieved independence, anti-Rana movement gained greater momentum in Nepal, whereas Rana's rule continued to slacken after the British retreatment from India. On 18 February 1951, Rana oligarchy ended and a multi-party democracy was introduced in Nepal, the modern period. Chittadhar Hirde, I already mentioned, he wrote Ethic Sugata Saurara based on Buddha's life. The modern period. Despite the political change of 1951, Nepalbhasa did not gain much in status. It did not achieve the right to be used in the court of justice or the administration. Nepalbhasa was highly important as a language of the valley. It was the language of the highly educated community of Nepal. As a language of the cultural center and the center for power, Nepalbhasa was the language of wider communication and also served as a lingua franca in those days. It had to lose gradually under the new system because it did not receive any recognition from the government, while the Khas Nepali alone was made the medium language of government, administration, and the schools. Individual, private, cultural, and social organizations remain responsible for expanding modern literature and publication in Nepalbhasa before and after the change of 1951. But negligence on the part of the state continued. In 1951, just before the fall of Rana, Democracy Radio, Nepal Prajatantra Radio Nepal started an anti-Rana propaganda medium broadcasting news in Khas Nepali, Nepalbhasa, and the Hindi language. Shortly after the 1951 change, many public schools were opened to educate the common people. Unfortunately, in those schools, Nepalbhasa was not recognized as a medium of instruction. However, the Nepal Rashtriya Vidyapit, or non-governmental organization which took the initiative in the field of education in the public sector, recognized Nepalbhasa as an alternative medium in those schools and colleges, which were run by them. This encouraged the Newars scholar to take responsibility to produce educational materials in Nepalbhasa. On March 3, 1951, the Council of Nepalbhasa Parishad was formed by Newars scholars, which began to publish educational materials and literary books. Simultaneously, other Nepal Bhasa organizations also started working in similar field. During this period, many new publications in Nepal Bhasa appeared and a new organization were established. The first Nepal Bhasa daily newspaper and a literary magazine appeared during this period. The Nepal Education Council adopted Newar as an optional subject. His Majesty's government also recognized Nepal Bhasa as spoken language subject and an Oriental language subject in 1953. In 1956, a report of Nepal National Education Planning Commission was presented to Nepal government, which recommended only Khas Nepali to be made medium of instruction, aiming clearly to eliminate all other languages of Nepal. The report is also known as Wood Commission's report, as it was prepared under the guidance of the Wood and American educationists. In the same year, the interim government of K.I. Singh declared Khas Nepali to be the only language of instruction in schools at the cost of all other languages of Nepal. This decision inspired some protests in Tarai, the southern belt of Nepal, in favor of the Hindi language. But the Nepalbhasa speakers made no protest. The 1959 Constitution of Nepal declared Khas Nepali to be the national language of Nepal. The first general election took place in 1959 and gave the Nepali Congress Party a massive victory and formed its government, but only to be dismissed by the elected government by the parliament. Banning all political parties, the late King Mahendra introduced the dictatorial monarchical Panchyat System, which functioned for 30 years in Nepal. Freedom of expression was limited under the system. To the detriment of all other languages, religions, and ethnicities, he strongly imposed a one language, one nation, one religion, and a one culture policy in favor of the Khas language, the Baun and Kshatriya community, and the Hindu religion and the culture. Therefore, together with all other non-Nepali languages of Nepal, Nepalbhasa again suffered a great deal. In 1965, Nepal Radio closed broadcasting Nepalbhasa and Hindi news. It gave rise to protests from literary circle. The various Nepalbhasa literary and cultural organizations in the valley organized protest literary meetings for 1 year. Many Nepalbhasa writers were arrested and tortured, but the protests were limited to the literary elites who were unable to gain support from common people to launch any effective movement. It was because the common people did not realize the consequences of the repressive measure applied against their language by the government. So the protest meeting had to stop without having achieved any demand. However, the year-long literary protest meeting, which is also known as Baisal Bhasa Andolan, inspired several dedicated youth, most of whom remained devoted to the cause of language rights. Gradually, its influence started to spread beyond the Kathmandu Valley to many other small and big Newars settlements. In small towns like Sapu and Hetauda, where no literary association existed till the 1960s, a single person such as the late poet Girja Prasad Joshi inspired literary and a cultural movement. He stimulated many local young people to work for the promotion of Nepalbhasa. The publication became more difficult with the imposition of censorship, which intended to prevent any kind of publication against the Panchyat system. For decades, no new Nepalbhasa magazines, journals, or newspapers received permission to be published. In 1971, the new education plan was introduced, which further pushed Nepalbhasa back by forcing children to choose between Nepalbhasa or other languages, science, vocational subject, mathematics, and so forth. This policy may mean the final suppression of the education of Nepalbhasa and literature at the school level. In higher education, then only University of Nepal, Tribhuvan University, accepted as an optional subject, as a part of the spoken language, vernacular. The subject Khas Nepali, Hindi, Maithili, as well as Nepalbhasa, Newars. From 1959, but in 1971, vernacular subjects were removed from the curriculum of the university, and the Nepalbhasa remained only as an optional subject to be chosen amongst several other subjects, neither at primary or secondary level, nor at the university level, is supposed to be the medium of instruction in 1977 onward. Nepalbhasa was introduced at master's level, and a PhD degree was also made possible. Moreover, a degree in Nepalbhasa from the university was not highly valued, since it did not give access to employment in administrative posts of HND, as it did not add marks for promotion. The Royal Nepal Academy of Nepal did not recognize any prominent literary figure in Nepalbhasa. It published no books written in Nepalbhasa in those days, but recently, few books they have published in Nepalbhasa too, most recently, even this year. Also, the government-owned Saja publication which was originally called Gorkha Bhasa Prakashan Samiti, but later renamed as Nepali Bhasa Prakashan Samiti, and in 1965 converted into Saja Prakashan, never published any books on literature in Nepal Bhasa, while it continued publishing textbooks and readers as well as literary texts in Khas Nepali. The Curriculum Development Center of Tribhuvan University and the Education Material Production Center is producing Khas Nepal textbook for higher education and schools, but they never publish books in any of the other languages of Nepal. The government-run Radio Nepal and the Nepal television were also reserved only for Khas language, Nepali language. They were giving regular program in Hindi, Urdu, English, but one of the native languages of Nepal rarely received a chance in those electronic media. So after Baudal and now in Republic time, they have certain programs in Nepal, sometimes they broadcast drama or songs like that, but not real programs yet. Nevertheless, Newar intellectuals were trying to encourage devotion to their mother tongue among the Newar through various literary and cultural organizations, organizing weekly, monthly, or yearly literary programs celebrating birthdays of the late Nepal Bhasa writer or observing Nepal Sambat New Year's. In 1979, this just for you to know the recent figure of the mother tongue speakers. In 1979, following the consequences of student movement, King Birendra announced the political referendum and lifted restriction against public gathering and meeting. This situation allowed the Newars to organize themselves in a new way for the cause of their language and ethnic or national identity. The result was the formation of Nepal Bhasa Mankakala, Association of the Newar Speaker in August 1979. They categorically rejected the one language, one nation, one religion, one culture policy of the government and urged equal rights to all languages and nationalities of Nepal. Their demand included education in mother tongue to children, rights to all the languages to be used in the court of justice and administration, access for all languages to the government media, and the recognition of culture of all nationalities. In the 1980 referendum, the partyless Panchyat system declared victorious against the multi-party system, and the old language policy continued to prevail. However, the Nepalese press continued the freedom that it acquired during the referendum period. The launching of the Nepal Bhasa Weekly Enough in Kathmandu in 1982 was a milestone in the Nepal Bhasa movement. It played a vital role in inspiring awareness among the Newars for their lingual and national rights. The circulation of the Enough was not limited to the Kathmandu Valley, but also reached many other Newars towns outside the presence, outside the valley. Similarly, another weekly Rajamati was also launched during this same period. Now we turn to a little bit on present period. After 1990, some recognition to language came, but nevertheless, Nepali remained to be the official and administrative language, none other to be recognized as official language. One recognition of our language in 1995 during Manmohan Adhikari's prime ministership. Our language was being called Newari, but he declared it should be called Nepal Bhasa officially, but it is still not happening in media. From the time of autocratic Rana regime till today, the repression of Nepal Bhasa saw no end. The Newars, however, are keen to develop their language and literature on their own. Many Newar literary and cultural organizations appear, and even many Newar individuals put their effort published numerous books in Nepalbhasa without any support from the state. There are numerous publications to be found in all sections of writing, modern essays, plays, fiction, and poetry. It was only in the 1920s that Dharmaditya Dharmacharya introduced a modern essay in Nepalbhasa. But at present, there are many established essayists in Nepalbhasa. The late Moti Lakshmi Upasika was the first person to introduce a modern short story in Nepalbhasa in the 1930s. She also happened to become the first women's short story writer in Khas Nepali. Nowadays, there is a bulk of short story writers in Nepalbhasa. Modern playwriting in Nepalbhasa began with the publication of Chittadhar Hriday's Kalyani in 1950s, and it has developed since many new playwriters. With the publication of the late Dusan Sami's Misa, Nepalbhasa received the most gifted novel writer. He left many novels to his credit. Similarly, the great poet Girja Prasad Joshi, beside his contribution to poetry, drama, and literary criticism, he left so far the longest list of novels in Nepalbhasa. At present, there are many novel writers in Nepalbhasa, including the first women novelist Sasikala Manandar. Most recently, in 2021, a veteran Nepalbhasa writer, who himself is also novelist, Mathura Sami, initiated Women's Nepalbhasa Novel Competition. It was unprecedented as it succeeded at producing 12 different novels written by various women writers in one single year. That includes Sri Lakshmi Koronai Kichari, which she recited few chapters last week, and which also won first prize. Modern poetry in Nepalbhasa was initiated relatively late compared to other fields. It was only in 1960s that the publication of Purna Baide's poetry collection Sarasu, Nepalbhasa, received its modern poetry in the style of T.S. Eliot, who introduced modern poetry in English language in the 1920s. The most celebrated poet in Nepalbhasa who is still active in writing is Dr Bal Shrestha, who has inspired many new talents in Nepalbhasa. The late poet Girja Prasad Joshi, who unfortunately passed away at the tender age of 49, left behind more than 80 books and numerous pieces of poems, together with an epic poem, Lohama. Nowadays, Nepalbhasa is rich with many new generation poets who are engaged in contributing to enhance modern poetry. Okay, some of the book Nepalbhasa famous writers. Nowadays, Nepalbhasa is rich with many new generations. The Newars can be very proud of having numerous poets, not only during the early days of its history, but also at present. Notably, Newar writers produce a considerable amount of protest writings, which because of the continuous suppression of their language continuous suppression of their language has to be behaved throughout its modern history. Beside original creative writings in Nepalbhasa, there is a tradition of translating whole literature into Nepalbhasa, the Nepalbhasa into Nepalbhasa into English. For instance, Tirtharaj Tuladar devoted the whole of his life to this valuable work. However, there are only a few academicians who have been working toward translating Nepalbhasa literature into English. Among them are Professor Tejaratna Kansakar and flourished Kesarlal Shrestha, Kesarlal, who already passed away, who took their burden of translating Nepalbhasa literature into English upon themselves out of their hobby. They have translated numerous Nepalbhasa fiction, poetry, and essays into English in their lifetime. Kansakar, now in his 80s, is still active in this field. Recently, Sylvia Rajapadhyay, Rajan Manandar are also seen engaged in translating Nepalbhasa into English. In 1980, Chosapasa initiated Sahitya and carried out a translation project, and it received financial support from the Toyota Foundation, Japan. Initially, it translated many Japanese books into Nepalbhasa and Khas Nepali. Later, as the Toyota Foundation awarded a project called No year neighbors thyself. Sahitya Guthi began translating South Asian literature into Nepalbhasa, as Nepali, Maithili also. Similarly, it also translated representative Nepal-Bhasa writings into English. A few foreign scholars have also taken an interest in this task of translating Nepal-Bhasa literature into English. For instance, Todd Lewis, together with a Newars scholar Subarnaman Tuladar, translated the voluminous epic poem Sukat Saurav of late Chetadar into English. Similarly, David Hargreaves translated some of the poems of Dr Shrestha into English. Now I have seen Christopher translating Nepal Bhasa poems into English. So hopefully we will be seeing in future. In this manner, Nepal Bhasa literature is gradually being made available to a greater mass of English readers. In 1979, with the establishment of Mangka Kala, the Newar elite could manage to combine the language movement in a forum, whose chairman was a prominent human rights activist of Nepal, the late Padmaratna Tuladar. I have his photo somewhere. Oh, no. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. This is Padmaratna Tuladar. It's not full screen. Numerous Newar literary organizations exist in different towns and villages of Kathmandu Valley and outside the valley. In 1992, a Nepal Bhasa Academy was established in Kathmandu. Nowadays, besides several literary magazines and journals, a daily Nepal Bhasa Time and a few weeklies such as Samnik Wapo are regularly being published in Nepal Bhasa. Noteworthy is the publication house Iloho, which has been publishing Laiku bi-monthly, Nali monthly literary magazine, Iloho, Children's Digest, Lipipo, Nuakho, Ranjana, Po, PS3 beside books in Nepal Bhasa. Iloho is also now publishing Newar Land, a monthly paper in English for wider public to update current activities of Newars, whose current editor is well-known linguist Dr. Jyoti Tuladar. There are also web-based new bulletins, magazines, and forums, though in a moderate and a meager manner. In addition, journalists associated with various FM radio have been broadcasting Nepal Bhasa program daily. Similarly, beside Nepal Mandal TV, there is a few YouTube-based TV senders which have broadened the interest of Newar people in Nepal Bhasa and the literature. Since 1995, the Newars are organized under the umbrella of the Forum of Newars, Newa Dedabu, to achieve equal rights to their language and culture. The Newars have also been at the forefront of the campaign for education in the mother tongue, long before the new constitution of 1990 granted that right. However, post-1990 governments did virtually nothing to promote other languages of Nepal, as it retained only Khas as Nepali national language for modern official use. The Supreme Court of Nepal went further, issuing a decision in 1999 prohibiting the use of local languages even in municipalities and a district development committee. This has infuriated non-Nepali speaking nationalities of Nepal and instigated many protest programs, but to no avail. Oh yeah, this protest every year taking place on June 1st, this 18, against the decision of the Supreme Court, symbolically too. For a long time, mostly Newar were at the forefront in advocating their language and culture. But with the establishment of Federation of Indigenous Nationalities of Nepal, Nepal Adivasi Janjati Mahasangh in 1991. Its 62 members then have shown their solidarity to achieve equal rights to their languages and cultures. They urge that the state must end the present discriminatory policy against non-Khas Nepali-speaking nationalities and treat languages, culture, and religions of all nationalities equally. The history of suppression of nationalities and languages in Nepal has been huge changes, has seen huge changes, with the country turning to become a federal democratic republic by overthrowing the 240 years old autocratic monarchy. The symbol of suppression of ethnic nationalities and the languages in Nepal. There are conflicting views regarding the formation of a federal state amongst the parties and Janajatis. Some are of the view that the country should be divided along the line of geography, while others, especially the various Janajati group, insist on its division based on ethnic and lingual line. The Janajatis demand for autonomy and self-determination rights are intended to promote their languages and culture on an equal basis, while certain groups in Tarai will even insisting on a federal state with right to secession. It's Sikher out, who wanted new country now in the mainstream politics nowadays. But few still remain talking about secession. The oppressed nationalities hope to see a new constitution to be made ending all discrimination based on language, culture, religion, nationality, gender, and caste. However, the making of the constitution was delayed because of conflicting views among the political parties on major issues, including the structure of the federation. Finally, in 2015, when a new constitution was announced, again, it led continued the domination of first language over all other languages of Nepal, as it declared Nepali language written in Devanagari script shall be the language of official business in Nepal. I have this 2015 Article 6 and 7. Should equal rights be granted, Nepalbhasa would be the most in the most advantageous position because it has the longest history of writing literature. It continued maintaining the tradition of writing even during the most adverse time of history. They survived the autocratic Shah rule, saw the most ruthless Rana regime, the dictatorial Panchyat System, and the so-called multi-party democratic system, where their language has remained continuously being neglected. The Newa people believe if the Newa Rajya or Nepal Mandal is realized, making the Newars themselves their masters, and when the state itself begins supporting Nepalbhasa and literature, it will flourish profoundly as it was never before. Newa people have been struggling for equal rights to their language since the Rana Hemiri rule. Regrettably, even new constitution that declared in the Republican Nepal has ignored their demands. In this situation, they are left but no other option than to continue with their struggle to achieve their rights. I'll stop. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much for an amazingly diverse talk, spanning such a long period of history and so much of text, authors, and history and struggle. Thank you so much. Maybe we should open right away to questions, comments. I have a list of questions myself, but please go ahead first.
I have a question, if I may. I had the great pleasure of first meeting you both earlier this year at a book launch in Sangku, where you were launching some of your fiction, your literary criticism, and I had the great pleasure of attending different of these book launches, these events. I'm always impressed with how much care, how much thought goes into things like where to have it, who to invite to speak, and also the sense of one part of the Nepalbhasa community coming together and discussing important matters to do with the survival and propagation and use of the language. And as you were talking about the way that writers, sort of the end of the Rana period into the first democratic period, would often meet in shops or would gather in sort of would come together in these kind of shops or meeting rooms and houses to discuss and to create. I'm wondering if you see that the book launch as an event, as a way that somehow does the same thing as a chance of people to come together in ways that maybe they can't anymore in traditional courtyards or neighborhoods, as a way to sort of unite and discuss and share, or really what role those kind of book launches play. And I can't say if in the Khas Nepali literary artists have the same kind of preoccupation with these launches, but it seems to me like a very important event for the contemporary Nepalbhasa scene.
Yeah, in a way, it can be said such gatherings help come together and discuss about the Nepalbhasa movement. So still we are in movement. We still want to achieve equal rights from the state, which has not been achieved yet. So during such gatherings, people always talk how our language is still being suppressed and what should we do. So this kind of stuff they always yeah.
And one other, maybe just to add to that, at a time when it's hard, when you at a bookstore, at a kind of regular bookstore, you see very, very infrequently will you find a Nepalbhasa book. Sometimes now I've seen posters in windows after a book launch of a newly published Nepalbhasa book. But often, at least for me, in getting new books, it's at these book launches where you'll get the author's signature. I certainly came away from your event with many books that I'm very excited to continue reading. And I'm wondering if also in that sense of distributing books, that's also a way of where people can get things to read when they can't go to I don't know, the regular bookstore.
Yeah, actually, it's in the weakness of Nepalbhasa publication, we don't have proper book shops. So one small shop in Assam, Natibajra, who really saw the whole of his life to sell the books, Nepalbhasa books. But now he passed away. His sons or daughters, they are not taking over his job, but some others they employed who is not regular, not properly selling book. And there is another shop, Manka Dhuku, that is also not really shop, but they also have other business, Sahakari business, and they also put some books there. But if somebody really want to buy book, it is really very hard. It is always like that in the past also. So when we also published our books in the past, so what we had to do is not only during such literary events, but also other times we used to go around and sell kind of push sell. And also the fact is that for Newar people, though they speak Nepalbhasa, some of them, most of them, they really cannot read because there's no reading habit. So very difficult. Yeah.
Just a maybe follow-up question. What do you think can one do, or can the Nepalbhasa writers community do to create a larger readership?
There were several such initiatives took place in Kathmandu. It is not completely closed, but there was some class within Safu Sahakari. That's cooperative type of organization of the writers and well-wisher of Nepalbhasa. They made members and they started distributing book among the members. So there were like 250 members already in the past. So usually Newar people tend to publish book like 1,000 maximum, or 500, or sometimes less. So if such organization can continue initiated more like that, it will be easy. Also, in the past, what we used to do is also we used to went to municipalities. Also, we contacted other organizations in UK, America, to sell the books. But it is not always easy. It's to post book from Nepal to US is very expensive, or to UK or Australia. But it will be very good if all those organizations and Newar organization is spread throughout the globe nowadays. So if all such organization, each organization buy 10 or 20 copies of book, it will be thousands. So in fact, they should do it.
But as you say, what also needs is to create reading habits,
Reading, yeah,
and reading practices and context in which
yeah.
one reads
They actually
and discusses and
right.
Yeah.
Actually, the reading practice became so weak because Newar people cannot do not have right to study at the school. Now, Kathmandu municipality has introduced one subject, Nepalbhasa, in the schools. So similar initiatives should be taken place in all over. Another Ministry of Education actually should launch mother tongue education as they promised, because the Constitution says it is the right to get education in mother tongue. And they also passed law to introduce mother tongue education, but in practice they did do nothing. So not only for Newars, but also for other language communities, it is very important that the government introduce mother tongue, at least one subject or the primary level in mother tongue education. Otherwise, the dropout also very big among non-cost speakers. I also used to be a teacher in the village in nearby Saku, Tamang village it was. So the Nepali speaker student come walking 2 hours, but the neighboring school, Tamang community, they don't used to send their children to school because it's very hard for them to, even some of them come, they would drop out in 2-3 years time. So I think the most important is implementation of education in mother tongue in Nepal, because so many languages, they are dying, even Nepalbhasa now, the speakers are gradually decreasing because of the education system. Yeah.
We have one question from Madhusudan, summer school student.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Shrestha, for your wonderful presentation. Yeah, actually, I was wondering about maybe it might be a kind of follow-up from Christoph. My curiosity was, how is the state of art regarding the study of classical Newar in Nepal, especially as you also mentioned that there are many texts that are written, and you give an example of Haramekhala, which is fabulous for me as a student of Ayurvedic text, and it's kind of very encouraging news for me. And then at the same time, I was wondering, are there any people? Of course, I guess there would be, or there are people working in classical text that are written in classical Newar. So it would be great to be in, kind of exchanging our ideas with them. I'm getting ideas from Christoph and you and Sri and all people from summer school, that this summer school, which is eye-opening for me. Yeah. That was kind of curiosity, maybe question. Yeah, at the same time. Yeah. Thank you very much.
President. Actually, there are not too many, but there are few people who are interested in classical text, classical books. For instance, the Nepalbhasa department, they have a certain number of students every year. They would be doing transliteration of the old text. Also, there is a Nepal Lipi Guti, whose task is to teach Lipi, Nepal script, to all people, as many people as possible. Also, there are other individual initiative and calligraph sort of events where they teach how to write, read old scripts. So they are promoting that. If this kind of events continues or task continues, probably in the future, we will still have some people who would be interested in translating old text. But not too many who are interested in this field. That is sad.
Thank you. We have another question from Catherine. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Christoph.
Hello, Kathy.
Oh, namaste, Bal Gopalji and Sri Lakshmi. Sorry about the light. Dhanyavad. It was so wonderful to hear the talk and to see you after a long time. And I have to, following up on Ian and Christoph's and the other question, I have to ask about Sanku. I was so interesting to hear about the book launches, and I had memories of so many, private libraries full of literature and sort of just such extraordinary generalized knowledge of literature, literary history in Sanku. And I wondered about the book launch. Does the fact that Ian attended a book launch recently suggests that tradition continues in a place like Sanku, that people maintain their libraries, that there's an interest in literary history and literary production, which is, similar to Christoph's question. How do you create a readership, but also, are there pockets of readership that are particularly notable? And is Sanku one of them? And is it partly because of that sociality, that Ian described so beautifully, connected to something like a book launch? That literary production and consumption is so deeply integrated into a wider cultural milieu. Does that still characterize Sanku?
Yeah, you're right. In the past, actually, there used to be many literary activities in places like Sanku and other places also. When we talk about Sanku, in our time, we used to have many literary activities, weekly or monthly or yearly, this kind of activities we used to have.
Yeah.
But nowadays, not too many such activities as it used to be in the past. So there are few Nepalbhasa related organizations in Sanku. So they would organize a musical program, a literary program time to time. But still, somehow it is not so strong as it should be. So the readership also declining because, as I already mentioned, because of denying right to use mother tongue in school. Even the Newars peoples of Sanku nowadays, the children, when you were there in late 1990s, most Newars children would speak Newar language. Yeah. Nowadays, you will see rarely. So this is so sad to see, a sad development. So probably if mother tongue is Nepalbhasa is introduced in school, we will be seeing the revival of language among the children. Otherwise, it is like dying.
Wow. And what about social media? You know, such a significant part of
Media
youth culture.
very
Is there?
strong. Yeah, very strong. Some who are active in social media, they have been using this forum to promote language, but also you will see limited people in this forum. But young generation are coming forward. Not few are there, but not satisfactorily. So the main problem would be among the young would be they don't speak Nepalbhasa. Either they speak Parbate or English, but not Nepalbhasa. So
What about one last question? What about scholarships for the study of Nepalbhasa? Are they available through either the university or schools?
There are certain scholarship and rewards or prizes are there, but still it is insignificant and insufficient for people to follow Nepalbhasa. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. It's all very new to me because I study Nyama and a Buddhist studies scholar, but I wanted to ask a question about the role. Like, it seems to me that there's a very strong identity between Newar language and Buddhism. And I wonder how much did that lead to the suppression of the language? And then on the flip side of that, has the role of Buddhism, I mean, you showed, is it Chittarya?
Yeah.
How much did Buddhism kind of influence the Renaissance? And is that still going on, or in your opinion, is it strong connection between Buddhism and the language maybe holding Newar back, or like how, you know? So that's, I have another question about the Constitution, but I can ask that later.
Yeah, actually, as I briefly mentioned, in 30s, 40s, the Theravada Buddhists were expelled from Nepal. So the Buddhist movement, Theravada movement, and the Nepalbhasa movement almost same time happened. So the Buddhist monk also, like Amrita Nanda Bhikshu, also Ghosh, Sudarshan, they were very highly respected Buddhist monk in Nepal, also wrote many books in Nepalbhasa. But in the recent period, however, what I've been seeing is they are not so doing much for Newar language. So they think, probably they think it is not so used for spreading the religion from this language, which is not spoken by mass of people. So I don't know. But in the past, it was really very good going together with this movement and the Nepalbhasa movement. Yeah.
And that's partly why, pardon me if I get the periods wrong, but like the Gokale, you know, after the mid 18th century, is that why the language was suppressed as well, because of its role with Buddhism and the possibility to kind of cause agitation?
Yeah, in a way it was, yeah.
In a
It
way.
was suppressed because also it spoken by Buddhists. Actually, Kathmandu Valley, though the Newar people nowadays many began to call themselves Hindu. There was no real demarcation among Hindu Buddhist people. So for instance, in my own family, I heard from my father that we used to have Buddhist priests in the past. So they forsaken Buddhist priests and adopted Hindu priest Rajapadhyaya. So this way, many Newars, especially during Panchyat time, also it started already in Rana time. It intensified in Panchyat time. More and more Newar people began to call themselves Hindu. But in practice, it is difficult to say if they are really Hindus. So in other way, you also may not say them just Buddhist.
And if, sorry, but I'm curious, what is the Constitution of Nepal in 2015 say about religion? And how does
Oh.
that then reflect on the language situation?
Good question. Yeah, regarding religion and constitution in Nepal, all the time during the Rana period, though the Hindu was not declared as national religion, but only in Panchyat time, I think I guess it is after 62, 65, Nepal began to be called Hindu Kingdom. So this continued also after 1990 change of political change in Nepal, and only after 2008, 2006 change, then Nepal began to become a secular country. So the interim constitution declared it secular fully. But 2015, when the constitution was declared, it has certain restrictive sentences, which says, though it says it is a secular country, it would say it will secular, it will promote the Sanatan Dharma, kind of things. So. Not, but still people consider it is secular after 2008 new change. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a comment also following up on Tony's question. I'm personally I'm very interested in the period of the 1910s, which you described so nicely. I mean, going back to the Buddhist situation. In their big book, David Geliner and Sarah Levine, they've talking about Theravada and the emergence of modernity in Nepal. They make this very strong point that that because Theravada Buddhists were both connected with abroad, with international networks, and because they had this felt this resistance, experience of resistance from the state, that Buddhism and modernity and resistance to the state became one force. What I found really interesting, and that's something, and what they also say is that the Buddhists had an advantage in a way of jumping onto the bandwagon of modernity because of that constellation. And they say that in their book that on the Hindu side it was much more difficult because Hindu communities were more co-opted by the Hindu state. However, I think what you point out I find really interesting. When you talk about Chakraraj and the Arya Samaj, that movement, that in some way, I think what's been looked at too little in scholarship is how Hindu reform movements also played an important role, particularly in that earlier phase. You know, the Theravadins, they came in the 20s and 30s with Dharmaditya and so on, but things that were really happening actually on the Hindu side much earlier, and with Siddhidas Mahaju and his reform agendas, right? So I think that's something which in some way has remained in the shadow of this lionizing of Buddhism and modernity, and not really looking at how our Hindu modernity possibly prepared that. Which leads me to another comment, which I find interesting, what you also pointed out about these meetings in shop, and particularly the role of Yogur Singh Kansakar, and assembling Kasnepali writers and intellectuals. That in some way, and that's again something which hasn't been thought about and looked into enough, that in some way Nepali, Kasnepali modernity in terms of literary emergence of modernity may be interesting to look at that as the moment where Newar and Nepalbhasa and Kasnepali activists, writers, intellectuals were actually in some way working together to create modernity, which is not just a Kasnepali modernity, but then it's a much more hybrid beginning, so to speak, where you feel people like Dev Kota meeting in a very Newar environment, and then eventually becoming national poets and so on of Nepali, Kasnepali. Right? So in some way, the bilingual or multilingual or Newar Kasnepali interface plays as the origin of then eventually Nepali modernity. Just thoughts here. Of
Yeah.
possible, research projects or
Yeah,
research
yeah.
avenues.
You found them. Yes.
On this question. Because I am exactly interested in this in Nepal after become a secular state and how Christianity is developing inside of Nepal as a secular state. And one of the many things that I observed while I was there was the development of projects developing the translation of the Bible for Nepalbhasa. And when I heard about it, I imagined that the goal would be, especially proselytes, convert people. But then when I went to talk with these people who are doing the work of translation, I realized that they were actually passionate for the preservation of the language as much as to the mission that they're doing. And I wonder, because I didn't see if there is any overlap of those two communities, those Christians who are trying to preserve the language in their own way, in the literary community. And if there isn't any overlap, like if and how, and what are your impressions in this other way of preserve the Nepalbhasa?
Do you mean to say the published Bible?
They translating the Bible for Nepalbhasa. There's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
group.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know that. Kedar Situ, I think
Yeah.
the first who work translating Bible into
They have
Nepalbhasa.
a few chapters out, I think, but they working have the full thing.
Yeah. Actually, in our community, we have we used to have Christianity already in Malla period, and as soon as Gorkha conquest was successful, the Christian Newars were expelled. So some of their descendants still live in India, place called Motihari.
And
Bhetia. Ricard has written a long, beautiful article about those Newars living there. So during Panchyat time, it was really not possible Christianity to spread, but still in height, people began adopting Christianity, and after 1990 change, the number of Christian are increasing, and especially after this republic and Nepal through the king, and this is all happened because the Christian came and they promote to promote the Christianity in Nepal. Yes, some of those old age veteran would accuse. But among Newars also some interest in Christianity is still there. New generation also. Yeah, I know a few people who became pastor of a different sort of Christianity, not only one. I would say different sort of Christianity is popular among certain sect of Newars. But for most people, they would not like because they have so strong tradition of other rituals which would not permit them.
Are there Christian writers writing in Nepal?
I don't know. Good question. But I don't know.
I've collected work that is material about Christianity, but not, for example, as poetry or some kind of epic fiction or that sort of thing. They don't have. But one thing I've noticed is that, for example, talking back to the book launch, one thing that was launched this year was the audiobook of the Bible in
Nepalbhasa, yeah. Even
And-
television,
Yes,
YouTube serials.
exactly. Yes. And this particular one that we both attended, what it was a little cassette that had a little that you could plug in you could plug into the wall. It had a battery you could charge, but also had a solar panel that you could charge if you were away. And in that sense, the distribution or the translation of the Nepalbhasa Bible is also part of a broader history of Christian missionaries, I think, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but going into the field of ethnic language and minority languages as a way of proselytizing. And some of the people we met who were Newar, who were involved with translating the Bible, were part of groups, multinational groups or transnational groups that were also interested in translating into other of the minority languages of Nepal. But one thing I thought was interesting about the case of the Nepalbhasa Bible event was that there was a lot of uncertainty about whether we would be allowed to attend. And it was back and forth, and I had to kind of talk with one of the organizers at different times, and we were hearing different things from different people. Whereas usually when it's a foreigner who has familiarity with the language, that's very excited to attend. And whereas this was very ambivalent, only once we were there was it formed. So it's an interesting, I thought it was an interesting case of both being connected to transnational missionary movements, but also this need, because of this current state of secularism in the country, of not of also not projecting that too widely. That this has to be something that is shown to come from within the community rather from. I think part of the concern was that people that someone might think that we were involved with this translation, that it had been come from us, it had come from outside, whereas of course that was not the case. And I just thought it very interesting experience for me at not being included, that no, this needs to really be seen from coming within the Newar Christian community.
Thank you.
Just to follow up, because we started with the book launch, and then what Christoph was saying about these interactions. I think there are some books like on these Arya Samaji politics, and which actually makes sense, like how they interacted, and it seems there should be something in literature too. Then what is happening now in Nepali is like a lot of these events, like they call literary festivals.
Yeah.
So it has itself become a form, and like in a certain way, like you can think of in India, like Jaipur Literature Festival has become like one big internationally certain type of form, and like in all these countries everywhere, literature festivals have become like a kind of a form where it's not just talking about books, you have got interactions, you've got like a series of that. Is that happening in Nepalbhasa?
Oh, exactly. Good question.
Or how is it going? Or is there a possibility for doing so?
I didn't mention in my reading here, but so there was 2 or 3 times the other year have this literary festival in Nepalbhasa. So they have now imitated from Nepali events. I may say it. Yeah, but during COVID time, I think they stopped, but they will continue, I guess. One event.
Madhusudan, you have your hand up again. May I ask you?
If I may, yeah. Can I?
Yes, go ahead. Absolutely, yes.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah. Just we are talking about current state of art, but again, going back to about maybe 200, 300 back, I was wondering about the technical text. So was there any kind of, technical texts like Ayurveda, Jyotisha type of texts were composing in, let's say, in modern Newar, like in 19th century or maybe early 20th century? Like Christoph talked about Buddhist and Hindu texts and all those things, but I was, kind of thinking slightly different way, but in the same vein.
Some writers have written journalistic article on Jyotisha and others, but I don't see yet a whole book like that so far. Probably some of them would be writing Ayurveda either.
You would have them in the, in the ritual context. I mean, you have priests and Joshis write, say, on astrology and on and Vastu Shastra, right? That you get because it's necessary, right? It's useful stuff. You need that to to organize your life and to build houses. So yeah, there's modern stuff out there. And I would say that's even more recent than the 19th century. I think it's more 20th, the second half 20th century.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you to Dr. Shrestha for the insightful presentation. It's very in-depth. So I belong from Newars community, but I don't know much about these things. But when Dr. Shrestha was explaining about all these processes, I reminisce my school life. I used to have Oriental Nepali and Old Newari. I used to have Oriental Newari at the time in the school. And after in the college, I have optional. It's not never mandatory, never compulsory. The time is optional. So I chose in my +2 and my, let's say it's a year. At that time we call it intermediate. Then after we moved to the diploma. At that time, I chose to have the Newars, the other one. So having said this one, the presentation made me very knowledgeable in all this history of the Newars language survival and the struggle for all these things. And chapter wise, the Renaissance period and before period and modern period, all these. And I'm very happy to know all these things. I have two questions regarding this presentation. My queries, not the questions, queries. One is that, what about I heard that in Kathmandu Valley, there are some schools which runs completely Newars language. I heard, but well, like Jagasundar Bonikuti and Deepak Tuladhar has also launched. So are your other schools they're launching in typically and pure Newars language? And other question is that, how do you see the development and advancement of Newars language in the pretext of present Nepal's situation? The two questions. One is about the Newars schools. The other one is about your vision, your thinking, how the Newars language will advance in present context of Nepal.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah, as you said, only few schools, Jagat Sundar and Deepak Tuladhar's modern Newars school, and Khushbu school, and one few more schools, I guess, in Kathmandu. But elsewhere, not successful. Jagat Sundar could survive because it also received support from certain organization from Japan, and it could offer scholarships to children. And Deepak is very what to say, persistent. He's very good. So would be running every school, even not only at his school, he's doing good, but also to press other school to introduce Nepalbhasa subject in school. So in Deepak's school, as he, I met him, and when he talk about his school, he would say that our school is, though it is Nepalbhasa, we also give good English lessons to students. So the attraction is not just about Nepalbhasa, but also English teaching is good at his school. So this is because he's successful. But other school, I don't know. But now the Kathmandu municipality has in a way made it compulsory to teach one subject. It is not language though. It is about introduction of Kathmandu Valley local culture. Yeah, Masike. It is to introduce Masike. So it is not about language. So this way, it is also logical that everybody who's go to school may learn our culture of Kathmandu, but through Nepalbhasa. But it became possible because Kathmandu municipality funded teachers.
Training.
It won't be possible otherwise. For instance, in Sanku, it has not been done. In Bhaktapur, it has not been done.
It's trying,
Bhaktapur
but
municipality is not taking in interest. They made
Some
Bhaktapur
books.
Parichaya
Mhm.
in Khas Nepali instead of
Oh,
Nepalbhasa.
It's because Nepali.
Yeah.
I thought that's Newars, no.
No, not yet. But people are trying to persuade the municipality to introduce Nepalbhasa in October. But Patan they began, Kirtipur they began. So initially when I talked to the minister and mayor of Kirtipur, he said it will be possible to fund the teachers. So, partly I can do.
Mhm.
And I also talked to Patan municipality
Municipality.
mayor at a function in Satyamon's Joshi's place in 2018. He said, okay, I'll do, but he didn't do. But once Kathmandu municipality introduced, now they became they now mobilized and they started to lead. They have made school books, but what they're doing is a bit strange because instead of producing one textbooks for all Newars, Kathmandu producing one Yene Masike, Bhaktapur would be producing Khopo Masike. So this is not good. Lots of money would be wasted in this way. But if a real Bhasa course is made and Bhasa is taught to Newars and all the schools, that will give chance to grow Nepalbhasa. Yeah. Even the parents who now do not want to speak Nepalbhasa with their children, if their children start coming back home talking Nepalbhasa, they would be obliged to talk Nepalbhasa.
But some may ask, well, which Nepalbhasa? Bhaktapur Nepalbhasa?
Oh, this is good. Yeah. No problem. No problem. To me, I would be happy whatever, because we can communicate very well with Bhaktapur. Only with Dolakha little difficult. Even if you start reading Dolakha, you can understand quite well. But Dolakha is far from Kathmandu and Bhaktapur like that. But Bhaktapur, Kathmandu, almost same. Only little long pronunciations. Hana, Ana, Hana, Ana. So this much different. It is not really difficult. So I would say let them start in Bhaktapur with Bhaktapur dialects.
Yeah, at least they will grow in some way.
Yeah, in Kathmandu and Patan, whatever they do would be not much different. And Dolakha, they can do Dolakha.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because we can't start with all places with the same language, but they will not like it. But once you start it, then it can grow slowly.
Yeah,
and they can catch up in the national way.
Yekuruputa, uniformity is necessary, but this should come from ground.
We can anticipate at the beginning that's uniformity.
Any comments? Questions? Not then. I would like to thank all of you for an amazing round of contributions. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank our speaker for an incredible talk and for inspiring us to think about these things in such a complex manner. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Emmerich, he's doing very intensive way to advance to develop Newar language in university and Newar community in Toronto. So he has a lot of things to do with Newar. I'm very happy. So I want to respect you for because you started this kind of stuff. So I congratulate you and hope to continue to the English. So my respect to you. And also, I respect you must Dr. Bal Gopal Shrestha for coming here all the way from Netherlands and giving the insights of language, all these modern languages. So I didn't know, I met Mr. Gopal, Dr. Shrestha only one time, but we didn't talk about it. But now we talk it, and I know him very well. So I also thank you for your coming here and giving all these insights to all the people.
Right.
Srilasmi also, I want to have a Srilasmi too. Srilasmi also acclaimed Newars literature, so she has been instrumental in doing like such everything. So I would like to respect Srilasmi, but just like a token of love for other creation. And hopefully we'll have another creation from Srilasmi. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Big show.